I think that's part of the buy-in which we're seeing from governments, state and federal, because we're seeing it internationally. We're seeing governments across the globe that are saying, we think we can process improve, which might not be that sexy from the perspective of the people that really are the Bitcoin maximalists or those that believe that the tech only has one particular use. But this is process improvement as a mechanism to maybe changing the world for a lot of people. So wherever you are on that spectrum, whether you believe there is only one use or whether you think this is something that makes systems better, there's interest in all of those rooms at the moment.
That is Steve Vallas, and this is episode 27 of the Blockchain Pro podcast. Hello and welcome to episode 26 of the Blockchain Pro podcast. I'm Adriana and today's guest is Steve Vallas. Earlier this month, Steve was appointed CEO of Blockchain Australia, an association with a mission to advance this nascent industry by moderating conversations with government and the community on behalf of its members. Steve is on a mission to make 1,000 calls in 100 days, and 4 weeks in, he's already crossed the 200 mark. Let's get to know Stevie. Hi, Steve.
Hello, Adriana. How are you?
I'm all right. How you doing?
I'm okay. Are you ready?
I'm ready. I was born ready, and most of all, I woke up ready today.
Very good. It's always the case that you and I have plenty to talk about. So, what's the next 7 or 8 hours is us just recording this podcast?
I think that might cover it. You must have had a really interesting career to spend 7 hours of podcasting.
These are all the lessons I teach people so they can avoid the mistakes that I've made over a long period of time, Adrian. That's most of the book.
This is gonna be a cracker. Let's do it. Let's go back in time and tell us, how did you get started in your professional life?
It was all an accident. As are most of my good professional stories, I was a relatively lazy student and had things come to me pretty easily until I got to university and realised I'd accidentally fallen into a law degree. So found myself going through that process for a few years and came out a qualified solicitor, or came out qualified with a degree, and then had to turn it into a legal qualification. Flash forward a couple of years and I was suddenly a lawyer, and I wasn't sure that was anything I wanted to do. So that was probably the first moment in time I had to stop and think, where do I want my career to take me? So it was a moment of reflection, and I thought, I don't think I want to be a lawyer. So I did something that most lawyers don't do, Adriana. I went back to driving taxis.
Oh, that's interesting. But hold on, before we get to that, you went through a whole law degree without pausing and thinking, I don't want to do this? How did that work?
No, I fell into it accidentally. So I started doing an economics degree. So I had no aspiration to be a lawyer. So unfortunately for most people that want to be lawyers, they decide very early on when they've been watching TV shows and it looks like a great profession to be in, and they commit to it. I didn't have that aspiration. So I just did well enough in first year uni to transfer across. So I found myself accidentally doing a law degree. So it was a little bit easier for me to reflect on whether or not it was something I wanted to be doing. It was fun and it was stimulating, but it wasn't anything that was my life's dream at that point in time.
And what was it with economics that made you want to get out of it?
The economic stuff for me was always of interest. Like, I just remember being a bit of a geek when it came to business from a very young age, watching stock market movements when I was a 12-year-old, of all things. So I just always had an interest in business, and the business degree seemed like a good generalist degree to kick off, but the law degree, not so much. It was the case that at the end of the first year, someone said to me, you can transfer across if you want. So I thought, well, okay, sounds like something I should do. So that's how I jumped into it.
Okay. And so you were driving a taxi?
I was driving a taxi. Yeah. So my father was a taxi driver, Adriana, and it was probably...
Oh,
well, there you go. It was a very formative process for me. And I often reference it in saying to people that I learned very quickly how much others judged your capabilities by the thing that you did. And that was the obvious thing for me in the taxi. When I was a taxi driver and I didn't explain that I was also a university student, people spoke to me in a particular way and had an expectation that I must have been of a particular socio-economic class, and they quickly sort of decided what that was and they would communicate it to me that way. And then I'd find myself saying, well, I'm a law student, and suddenly the conversation would change. So I found out very quickly that it's easier for people to put you in boxes. So it was something that I carried through and have carried through professional careers, is that people are very quick to judge. So I'm always interested to see how people judge others.
And how do you use that in your own life to try and prevent yourself from judging others too quickly?
I think I don't judge. I mean, I think the advantage for me, there was another formative moment. Once I'd become qualified as a lawyer, there was probably the nicest lawyer I knew in the legal practice once pulled me aside and told me that I shouldn't be mixing with the secretaries, that I shouldn't be talking to them, that I was different to them because I had a university qualification. And it was a real moment in time for me, because my mother was a cleaner, my father was a taxi driver, and here I was being told that because I'd been lucky enough to go to university, I should turn my back on people who didn't have that qualification. So again, it didn't diminish for me the pride I have in my parents and their background and, the migrant story. So there was never an issue for me in drifting away from that pride, but it was just another formative moment that made me realize that some people will judge. So I've just carried that lens forward in the relationships that I have.
That's pretty cool. All right. So after taxi driving, what happened?
Sadness, unfortunately. The bad part of the story was I had a family member, my sister, became very ill, and over a period of time, I sort of helped my family get through that. It was quite a number of years, and my sister passed away at a young age, and I was left again trying to decide what it was I was going to do. And I decided that I wanted to afford myself some flexibility in my work environment. So of course I decided that I would buy a property, build a building, and get into the hospitality industry. Because what else would you do, having come out of taxi driving and life as a lawyer?
And having such a profound thing happen in your life, event like your sisters at that young age, would have changed how your outlook on life, right?
100%. So again, it took what I already knew of the way people judge people, and then this was a very clear sign for me about decisions that need to be made. Unfortunately, for a lot of people, it usually is a life crisis that changes their direction, whether it's illness, relationship breakdown, or some sort of financial sort of challenge. So that came relatively early in life for me. And because it did, it's again informed a lot of the decisions I've made. So it just set me on paths there. I was self-determined. I made a decision early on. I was going to be, successful, inverted commas, air quotes, one way or another. It might not be financially, but I wouldn't die wondering, Adriana. That was the early view I had of myself, that either way, I'd positively and proactively walk into decisions.
That's pretty good. It's a very good mindset to have early on. Sad that it often happens with something that it's good in your life, but it sort of makes you stronger and sets you on a good path, I think.
And I think the context stuff, I use the word context in so many environments, and I always say to people, for me, I recognise what that moment was for my family. It was the worst thing that's ever happened. And it sort of frames for me pretty much everything else. I don't really feel pressure in the same way as a lot of people in day-to-day environments, because I kind of remember quite clearly what 10 out of 10 is as far as noise between my own ears, and I know what most pressures are, which are work and things that will pass. So that's something that's assisted me over the last few years in particular.
That's pretty good. And what happened next?
That's probably a 17 to 25 hour podcast.
Okay, so let's fast forward from thinking of building a bar and falling into Bitcoin. How did you discover our world?
So the hospitality business, the quick version was I built it. It was the GFC. It was the worst time ever to take a building to completion and open up a hospitality business. One of the critical parts of running that business for me ultimately was social channels. I taught myself a lot of social channel network processes, Twitter, Facebook, and the like. That turned into a business for me much more quickly and much more seriously than I thought was going to be the case. So I spent a lot of time then teaching other businesses how to use social channels, and that became my primary business. So the hospitality was primarily a property investment, but for me, the day-to-day work was consulting work in social spaces. And we share this former and sometimes current love for that space. I really enjoyed it early on because the processes iterated quickly. The technology was moving really quickly. And then I realized after a number of years that it really wasn't anymore, but people still weren't picking up on a lot of the nuances in the tech. And I had my epiphanies, two of them. One was at an event where it was a big box retailer and an advertising agency of some size that was talking to the audience about the ability to form the perfectly identified client, customer, all the data that would flow that would allow you to customize some sort of a perfect experience for them. And I thought that's not the way the world is going. So I think you're wrong. I think data will come back to us. I think privacy will come back to us. And then the other thing, not too far away from that event, I was sitting in a room with a bunch of people that were talking about marketing and comms, and they all kind of sounded like me, and they all kind of looked like me. And I thought, I don't feel like I'm the same person as everyone else in this room, but it's very hard to distinguish. So those two things set me on a bit of a path, and it was, again, coincidence, luck, whatever it's going to be. I started availing myself of information around Bitcoin and blockchain, and I thought, I think this is something, and had one of those moments that I think all of us in the space do, that I just said, I think this is something, and I had the experience of a couple of decades of work to make me think, this time I'm going all in, and that's what I did.
That's great. So going all in, what does that mean to you? I mean, how long ago was this? Was this epiphany?
The epiphany was 3.5, 4 years ago.
Okay.
And the all-in version for me was, I was, as I said, a pretty average student by effort.
Mm-hmm.
I studied more probably in that first 18 months than I did in a 5-year university degree. It was every waking moment for me, effectively. It was YouTube videos, books, PDFs, meetups. It was every moment I could, I absorbed and absorbed and absorbed. So I feel like I had 5 years worth of education or 10 years worth of education in a year and a half. So that was the all in. People thought I was crazy. As you well know, I show up to everything, and I've shown up to hundreds and hundreds of events, and people said to me, don't you have a home to go to? Why are you doing this? But it was genuinely the belief that this was a space that was a bit of a greenfield space. And I think one of the things that I've said to people consistently, and I compare and contrast to life as a lawyer, when I was a law student, there were lots of law students in the system. There were lots of lawyers in front of me, and then lots of lawyers that came behind. So with most professions, you find yourself in this long line of people that you need to navigate around and chase down. This was probably the first time in my professional career where I thought there aren't that many people ahead of us here. It was something that was emerging so quickly and had emerged so quickly. I thought there are lots of opportunities here, and basically the rooms are empty, the fields are open. So it was for that reason I thought there's a natural advantage, and this is where I've been as competitive as I ever been in my life. I thought there's a natural advantage, so I'm going to start running, and then I'm going to try to get people to catch me. So that's what I did. I ran and ran and ran, and it's been now a few years of a pretty crazy pace just to sort of establish foundations initially, and then to build on those foundations and the relationships that come from that.
And yeah, along the way, how many events did you think you put along?
I started because the number became silly at some point in time, and so I kind of stopped trying to estimate. But I was imagining there for a number of years, it was at least 2 a week. Sometimes it was 2 or 3 a week that were face-to-face versions. So adding those up, hundreds and hundreds.
That's a similar number here.
Yes, I said the same commitment, also same bit of crazy in both of us.
So now you have a new role. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I'm pretty excited about the fact that I was appointed the CEO of Blockckchain Australia. I've sat outside of this organisation for a number of years, and I think the approach that I've generally adopted, and this is related to the other work I was doing, Adriana, was I kind of got to meet a lot of great people without the need to ask them for anything. So I just got to judge people again on their merits and not worry about what the commercial requirements were, relationships could potentially be. So I come off an enormous foundation of great relationships. I saw an opportunity here as far as timing is concerned. We're both involved in the national blockchain roadmap rollout. I see enthusiasm that exists now in the ecosystem that hasn't existed in the same way from my perception in the last few years, particularly from government and from industry. So I kind of felt like the planets were aligning. So when asked whether or not I'd consider applying for the role, for the first time I said, I think I would. I think I'd like to help bring this community together if it's possible to do it as quickly as possible, because I think we're all in a hurry because we've all committed an enormous amount of time here. But it was a bit of a surprise, and it's been a bit of a whirlwind.
In a good whirlwind?
Terrific. The quality of the conversations are incredible, and the enthusiasm is incredible. So right now, talking to government, talking to industry, talking to academic institutions, talking to startup participants, startup ecosystem players, everybody is enthusiastic that I speak to about this. And I think the connecting of the dots is becoming easier to do. And one of the conversations that's been a sort of a consistent narrative for me for a period of time, and I've carried through into this role, is the discussion that this is an infrastructure layer tech, that we don't have to own the verticals that we're in. We just make some of these conversations better and more interesting. And in the short and the medium term, I think we make a lot of products better and more interesting. So I think that's part of the buy-in which we're seeing from governments, state and federal, because we're seeing it internationally. We're seeing governments across the globe that are saying, we think we can process improve, which might not be that sexy from the perspective of the people that really are the Bitcoin maximalists or those that believe that the tech only has one particular use. But this is process improvement as a mechanism to maybe changing the world for a lot of people. So wherever you are on that spectrum, whether you believe there is only one use or whether you think this is something that makes systems better, there's interest in all of those rooms at the moment.
So let's imagine that we are now at this end of this T intersection, right? And we could go left or right, and that would be, we could take this down a enterprise solution way where only the big guys can play in this infrastructure, which is business as usual. Or we can take this at a different direction where every citizen can be a node provider, for example, if they choose to be, and be effectively a government service provider. Which way do you think you're going to go?
The thing you've just described is the bit that makes me excited. You go, which way does someone want to go? Just go that way. That's again, for me, the opportunity that presents here. Those that believe that the tech, that code is law and the tech should be the thing that undermines or underpins, I should say, everything they're doing, let them do that. Like, for me, it's creating opportunities for people to do what it is they want to do. I'm not smart enough to say what wins in a lot of these conversations. I know I really am respectful of people that have a view that they know what the winning thing is and then they end up backing in. I'm effectively technology agnostic at the moment that says, if there's a protocol you believe in, you're committing your time and resources. So good luck with it. And hopefully it gets you an outcome that justifies it. But I like the fact that people can lay their own bets. I like the self-determined path that this technology presents. And I think necessarily existing business as usual, big businesses, government, enterprise, they're going to try to make their systems better. There's no excluding them from this conversation. But at the other end of the spectrum, I love the fact that internationally right now, you can be contributing into an open platform, an open protocol in a way that you've never been able to do before. And that sort of goes back to the judgment and the assessment of people's context, Adriana. I love the fact that you can be a 21-year-old and shape the future of the world. And I love the fact you can be a 71-year-old and think, I can make valuable contributions here as well. So I like people backing themselves. My aim here is to allow people and to give people the confidence to back themselves in whatever direction they seek to take.
That's a great aim.
Yeah, it's aspirational. I like it too. And the selfish part for me, Adriana, is, and this is why I say to people, understand I'm a selfish person. I like watching other people succeed. I feel good about myself if I've helped someone else succeed. It's a very selfish thing. I know Russell Kogan was quoted once as saying, and I don't know whether or not it was actually true, where he said the most selfish thing he does is give to charity because he feels good about himself when he gives to charity. I feel that way in the community as well, that I like thinking that maybe part of what I did helped that process along. So I like seeing people succeed, and that's sort of what's baked into my DNA when it comes to the way I approach relationships.
Same here. What is your least in that? What is your least favorite thing about this space?
Least favorite thing about the space? That's a good question. I think for me, it's probably the things that don't have to take so long, but have. And that's just frustration with everybody. I'm okay with things taking a long period of time. And I think a lot of these conversations necessarily will take a period of time. I guess when people don't get the most out of themselves, can move at a faster pace and choose not to, that's just a general frustration. But I think we probably share this as well, Adriana. I've very much adopted Stoic lifestyle views that basically say, listen, it's not for me to determine good, bad. Ultimately, it's an opportunity and it is what it is that comes from it. So it's just recognizing personally, if I can accelerate things, I'll do it. But I recognize sometimes things just take an unnecessarily slow amount of time.
When did you get into Historicism?
The last couple of years I've been paying attention, but I have to say probably the last 12 months, it's really provided me a foundation to make a lot of good decisions. And I think it's probably built on the fact that so many of the things are removable conversations. Like when I maintain enthusiasm about the space, many of the people I speak to just express frustrations about what's not happening. So I guess from my perspective, I just recognize you are the company you keep is the general adage for me. It has been for a long period of time. And it's very hard if you're constantly stopping to make observations about how things are bad for you to actually move forward. So on that basis, I try to move forward or carry people forward with me. And sometimes, and this is one of the challenges of life and business in general, sometimes people fall off the back. And that's not a reflection on anything other than it's just hard to maintain a pace. So yeah, from my perspective, I've just been a little bit more considered of what other views are. And this is one of the legal things I learned many years ago. I sort of recognized it was the case that in an argument, both sides can be right. And the reason both sides can be right is because they bring a different view to the conversation. So whenever I was in legal stoushes, I would always think to myself, they're probably right because they're going home and having their view affirmed by their spouses and their business colleagues. So they can make a case. Now, the question is, in making that case, should you move forward anyway? So that's kind of what I carry into the conversations that I have in this space that says, I get that view, particularly when stakeholders are involved, and this is one of the biggest challenges in this space. You and I might be able to convince someone, that person then needs to go into their office and convince someone else who ultimately needs to convince the person who writes the checks. That's a very difficult process in this space because of the complexity that surrounds it. So that's why I sort of a little bit relentlessly pursue those conversations and try to layer that confidence.
So can we talk a little bit about the roadmap? And you are now deputy chair.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is cool. What does that mean? What else do you do that we don't do, with the other people on the committee don't do?
I think hopefully I just get to sit back a little bit more, Adriana, and rely on good people like yourself to do all the hard work is what I would hope. But for me now, it's just having, I think, probably a broader understanding. I have a line of sight on all of the conversations. So recognising that we are building out working groups at the moment. I think the supply chain working group is being put together, as is the credentialing working group, and some more to follow. So I have a little bit more visibility on what the general process is. But ultimately, I'm trying to encourage people to put their hand up. That's one of the key things at the moment, because a lot of people underestimate the value of their contribution. I've had quite a number of people that have said to me, I don't think I'm qualified enough to apply. And I've said, you've got deep domain experience in something. It doesn't mean you have to have deep domain experience in everything in order to put your hand up. So at the moment, I'm tapping a lot of people on the shoulder and saying, put your hand up, make a contribution. Let's put some meat on the bones around the roadmap.
And what do you see happening in the next 6 to 12 months in this space?
I think, importantly, the confidence will be built out from this process. Usually the criticism of government is that when they say they consult, they don't really consult, or they're not consulting enough, or they're consulting to the wrong people. I think this process, as it's been formed by the Department of Industry at the moment, has said the criteria is, are you willing to offer a view? So the fact that it's open in that regard, I think, is critically important. The exercise in an Australian context, from my perspective over the last few years, is a lot of people bought into a narrative that was a 2017 and 2018 narrative in this space. And they formed a view that this wasn't technology that was of interest. They crossed their arms and they've kept their arms crossed. I think internationally, that narrative shifted probably 18 months ago. We didn't shift with that narrative at the same pace. But I think there's now a growing appreciation for the fact that the world has moved on and that they are investigating this in a very material way. So now we're playing catch up in the confidence building exercise across government. And I think critically here, Adriana, and this has been one of the challenges, industry has not been compelled to participate. You know, we are a startup, ground up sort of ecosystem. Federally, we don't tend to mandate things, or it's not a particularly effective way to get things done because it's a state and federal system. So you rely on industry to step up and say this is something that has economic urgency or relevance, and that's been a little bit absent. I think that is starting to happen now as well. I mean, I'm seeing that from a lot of the chatter around financial services in particular, where there's a recognition that's impacting payments, gateways, networks, rails, all sorts of things that's happening all around us. I think that recognition is starting to sort of sink in. And once that happens, then I think industry will start really carrying the torch for us.
100%. There was news this week that FPOS is going to do a pilot with Hashgraph. So that is like huge, right? Because
it is.
Billions of transactions they process per year.
And I think that again, that's back to that same word, the confidence word, that says the truth is we don't want to be first in a lot of regards. And I know when we talk about Australia as an ecosystem, we compare it, for example, to Singapore, and Singapore is a fast mover when it comes to financial service implementations and regulations. We're just not that country. I don't think we should pretend to be the fast mover in that regard, but we can be a fast follower. We can be. Often we're not. We follow people in. So this is a question for us as a nation to say, do we want to move quickly? Because one of the things we consistently say is we've got some really smart people here and we can export this knowledge. So this conversation at the moment that says, do we want to continue to export things that we dig out of the ground? Universally, people say no. Well, the alternative to that is we export, as Steve Sammartino often says to me, ones and zeros, data. You go, do we want to be that nation? Here's an opportunity for us to do it. So it's a real call to action. It says, if we're willing and able to do that, why don't we get a move on?
And we have the right environment as well. Like Australia is a huge country with a small population that it's comparatively to other places in our region, like very rich. Our economy isn't the worst. I mean, everywhere now is going through this COVID hump, but I think we have the right playground to take this sort of chances.
I think we do. And I think, I go back a few years, a recognition even a few years ago that we have a regulatory framework that gives other nations confidence. So we can tick that box that says it feels like a safe place to do business. And that's what we are, generally speaking. We're a safe place to do business. From the perspective of education and tertiary institutions and qualifications, we're also viewed as a good teacher. I think a lot of other nations look to us and what our education system can potentially provide as a good template for what they can take into their own countries. So those things say foundationally we should do this. It's kind of us now making sure that we don't hand off all the value out of those two elements. We've got the frameworks, we have the education institutions, which means we've got the capability. So we don't have to hand it off in its complete sort of state. We can own some of those outputs as well. So again, that's the challenge. And particularly in a COVID environment for us, it's obvious now people are now saying, well, what does a digital first economy look like? And do we have that capability? And all of a sudden people recognize we're actually in a much better position than we previously would have thought to take advantage of this kind of environment. Our supply chains are holding up. So we go, fundamentally, the business of this country remains strong. So then it says, what can we build on from a digital perspective?
That's interesting. So what advice would you give to those people that are out looking in? They have that big question mark over their heads. They're walking around like maybe they heard about it, but they haven't really gotten, deep enough into it to understand the space. What should they do?
I think it's a real challenge in a lot of rooms when people try to explain it and they oversell. And they oversell in a way that says they want to convince 99 out of 100 people this is something they should be doing. I don't think you can do that with people. I think the reality in these rooms is some people will come with you. So the thing that I try to do to poke them into that state is if you have formed a view based on information you knew 2017, 2018, 2019, revisit it. Just revisit the information, see what's moved and see if your view has moved. If it hasn't and you didn't form a view, now's a good time to look at it. So it is just saying to people, just do your own investigation in relation to this. If you're interested in this technology from a tech stack perspective, look at it. If you think from a regulatory perspective it might be of some interest, look at it. From a consulting perspective, look at it. Look at the bit that is of interest to you and then follow that path. So it's not you have to do this, because the truth is I'm a contrarian in a lot of respects. It says when 1 or 2 or 3% of people go in one direction, you tend to get outputs. If everyone goes in the same direction, then you don't get the outputs you expect. These in plain sight opportunities don't exist. And this is the reality for us of the economic uncertainty we see at the moment as well, Adriana, is people are forming a view of this is what's definitely going to happen. If we look back any length of time, we generally are wrong. We're not great. No one saw this coming. No one sees these asset bubbles. We don't judge well. We only judge well with the benefit of history, which is the irony of having done an economics degree. Economists generally are great when they explain to you what happened as opposed to what's going to happen into the...
Yeah. Hindsight is, 2020.
It's amazing. So now it's just saying, do that. And then ultimately, and it's something consistently I say to people as well, own your decision one way or another. If you're going to stand on the sideline and say it's not for me, that's okay. Then get out of the way, let other people have a go. And the truth is, in some years to come, we'll all have to make an assessment as to whether or not this was a valuable use of time. And, Some will be right and some will be wrong. But ultimately, be comfortable that you've informed yourself, you've made a decision about where this technology is going. And if you are either getting on the boat or off the boat, so be it. But let's stop and review 5 years and 10 years from now.
That is a great note to end on. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Adriana.
And that was the electric Steve Vallas. Steve is very active on Twitter, so get in touch with him for questions, comments, or to get involved in one of Blockchain Australia's many initiatives. On that note, if you are in this space and want to support Blockchain Australia's work, the professional memberships start at $25 per year for students and $89 for everyone else. They have business memberships starting at $1,500 per year, so visit blockchainaustralia.org for details. I'll post the website link in the show notes, along with my details for your suggestions and comments about this podcast. Please don't be shy. That's it for this episode, and I will see you at the next block. Bye!